Tonight the mind is loud. You already know this. You would not be here if the mind were quiet. Something brought you to this place. Perhaps a day that felt longer than it should have. Perhaps a thought that kept circling back, no matter how many times you tried to set it down. Perhaps it was nothing you can name, just a tiredness, a heaviness, a feeling that the day left something unfinished inside you. And so, you are here, lying in the dark, looking for a little stillness. You have come to the right place. Tonight, we are going to spend some time together with stories. Old stories, quiet stories, the kind that have been passed from voice to voice for thousands of years. They come from the Buddhist tradition, from Zen teachers and wandering monks, and ordinary people who discovered something gentle about the nature of the mind. But you do not need to know anything about Buddhism to be here. You do not need to know anything at all. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. If you fall asleep in the middle of a sentence, that is not failure. That is the whole point. Your only task tonight is to lie here and breathe, and let the stories do whatever they do. Some of them may stay with you, some of them may dissolve the moment you hear them. Both of those things are perfectly fine. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. There is something quietly beautiful about knowing that people all around the world are lying in the dark at this very moment, listening to the same words, breathing the same slow breath. You are not alone in this. Whatever you are carrying tonight, someone else is carrying something too. And here in this space, none of it needs to be carried. If this path of quiet stories calls to something in you, you are welcome to subscribe and return to this space whenever you need a slower night. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head. Take a slow, deep breath, in through the nose and out through the mouth. And one more. Feel the surface beneath you, the bed, the blanket, whatever is holding you right now. It has been holding you this whole time, and it will continue to hold you. There is nowhere to go tonight. Nothing to fix, nothing to figure out, just this voice, and these stories, and the quiet dark around you. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. The night is yours now. Whatever happened today, whatever was said or left unsaid, whatever was done or left undone, it belongs to the hours that have already passed. They cannot be reopened. They cannot be edited. And that, if you let it be, is a kind of freedom. The only thing that is real right now is this moment. The dark, the quiet, the sound of this voice, and the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing. Everything else can wait until morning. We begin with something you already know. The mind that will not be still. Not because it is broken, not because you have done something wrong, but simply because that is what minds do. They move, they reach. They replay and rehearse and worry and wonder. An old Zen teacher once said that the mind is like a monkey swinging from branch to branch, never resting, never satisfied, always reaching for the next thing before it has finished with the last. And if you have ever lain in bed at night, watching your thoughts leap from one worry to another, from tomorrow's meeting to something someone said 3 years ago, to whether you remembered to lock the front door, then you already know this monkey quite well. But here is what those old teachers also knew. The monkey is not your enemy. You do not need to catch it. You do not need to cage it. You only need to stop chasing it. Let me tell you a story about that. In a village at the foot of a mountain, where the mist came down so thick in the mornings that you could not see your own hand In front of your face there lived a weaver. She was not old and she was not young. She was somewhere in the middle of her life. That place where you have lived long enough to accumulate regrets, but not long enough to have made peace with them. Her loom sat by the window of her small house, positioned to catch the morning light, and she worked there every day, from the times the sun was strong enough, see the threads, until the time it faded again into the hills. She was good at her work. Her cloth was tight, and even her patterns careful, her colors chosen with the kind of instinct that comes from doing the same thing for 20 years. The sound of the shuttle passing through the warp was a steady rhythm that filled the room, back and forth, almost like breathing. Her neighbors could hear it through the walls, and they said it was a comforting sound, the kind of sound that made you feel the world was in order. But her hands did one thing, and her mind did another. While her fingers moved the shuttle, her thoughts ran ahead of her, always ahead, always somewhere else. She thought about the cloth she had ruined last week, the one where the tension slipped, and the whole knots buckled like a road after heavy rain. She thought about her sister, who had moved to the city and stopped writing letters. She thought about the leak in the roof that she could not afford to fix, and the way the damp crept across the ceiling like a slow, dark stain that grew a little larger every time it rained. She thought about her mother, who had died in the autumn, and how the house still smelled like her sometimes. That faint scent of dried flowers and wood smoke that appeared without warning and disappeared before she could hold on to it. The thoughts were not dramatic. They were ordinary. But they never stopped, and at night, when she lay on her mat and pulled the thin blanket to her chin, they grew louder. The looms were silent. The village was silent. The mountain was silent. But her mind was a market square at noon, crowded and noisy and impossible to navigate. She could feel the thoughts pressing against the inside of her skull, like too many people in a small room. One morning, before the light was fully up, she found herself walking the narrow mountain path to the small temple near the ridge. She had not planned to go. She simply found herself walking the way you sometimes find yourself doing things when you have run out of other options. The path was steep and the stones were wet, and she had to watch her feet carefully to avoid slipping. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the higher she climbed, the quieter the world became, as if the mountain was slowly turning down the volume on everything below. The old monk was sweeping the courtyard when she arrived. He did not look up. His broom moved in slow, deliberate arcs across the stone, gathering fallen leaves into a small pile near the gate. She stood there for a long time watching. The sound of the bristles on stone was soft and rhythmic, like something that had been breathing for a very long time. Finally she spoke. "I cannot make my mind stop," she said. The monk kept sweeping, back and forth, back and forth. "What would you like it to do instead?" he asked. "I would like it to be quiet," she said. "I would like to lie down at night and hear nothing. Just silence, just rest." The monk stopped sweeping then. He leaned the broom against the wall and looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with the kind of recognition that comes from having once stood exactly where she was standing. His eyes were kind and old and very still. "Have you ever tried to hold water in your fist?" he asked. She frowned. "Of course, it runs through your fingers." "And what happens when you open your hand and hold it flat beneath the stream?" She thought about this. She could feel the mountain air cooling the sweat on her neck. Somewhere behind the temple, a bird called once and then was silent. "The water sits there," she said for a moment. At least, the mind is the same. He said, you cannot squeeze it into silence. But you can open your hand. You can stop gripping. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the silence comes on its own. Not because you forced it, but because you made room for it. He picked up the broom again. The leaves had already begun to scatter in the slight morning wind. Undoing his work, he did not seem troubled by this. She bowed slightly, not because anyone had told her to, but because it felt like the right shape for the feeling inside her. Then she turned and walked back down the mountain that evening. As the mist was rising from the valley floor, the path was wet and soft underfoot, and the trees on either side were dark shapes that appeared and disappeared as the fog moved through them. Somewhere below, a dog barked twice and then was quiet. She did not feel different. She did not feel enlightened or transformed or cured, but she noticed, as she lay down that night, that her hands were open on the blanket. Palms up, fingers loose, and the thoughts came, as they always did, the roof, the ruined cloth. But she did not reach for them. She did not try to solve them or push them away. She let them move through the room, like the mist through the valley, present but not held. And somewhere in that not holding, somewhere in that small open space between the thoughts, she slept. You know this feeling. You know what it is like to lie in the dark with a mind that will not settle. The thoughts are not terrible. They are just relentless. They circle and return, like birds over water that never quite land. And the harder you try to quiet them, the louder they seem to get. The Buddha once observed that the untrained mind jumps from thought to thought, the way a fish pulled from the water thrashes on dry ground, not because the fish is broken. It is simply out of its element. It is looking for something to hold on to, and finding nothing solid. It keeps grasping. But tonight, lying here, you do not need to train anything. You have already done enough today. You have already tried hard enough. You do not need to stop the thoughts, or redirect them, or replace them with better ones. You only need to do what the weaver learned to do on that misty mountain. Open the hand, let the water sit. There was another soul who understood this, though he came to it from a very different direction. He was a carpenter who lived alone in a town where the sea was never far from your ears. You could hear it from every room in his workshop. A low, constant rhythm that was so familiar, he sometimes forgot it was there. The way you forget the sound of your own breathing until someone asks you to notice it. The workshop was small, built of stone and old timber, and it smelled of cedar and linseed oil, and sawdust that settled on every surface like a fine golden snow. He built furniture, tables mostly, and chairs, and the occasional bookshelf for the school teacher down the road. His work was slow and deliberate. He measured twice, sometimes 3 times, before making a single cut. He sanded with the grain, never against it, his hand moving in long, even strokes, until the wood was smooth enough that light slid across it, like water over glass. And when a piece was finished, he would sit in the chair or rest his hands flat on the table and simply stay there for a while, feeling the smoothness he had, made the way a painter might step back and look at a canvas that is finally done. But the carpenter had a difficulty that lived inside his chest, like a second heartbeat. He worried, not about large things. He was not afraid of storms or illness or poverty, not in any way that kept him up at night. He worried about small things, whether the joint he had glued that morning would hold through the winter, whether the woman who had ordered the dining table would notice the faint knot in the wood near the left leg, a knot so small you had to run your finger across it to feel it. but he could not stop seeing it. Whether he had said the wrong thing to the boy who delivered his lumber, who had seemed quieter than usual, who might have been upset, who might have been simply tired, but the carpenter could not stop wondering. The worry lived in the gap between finishing one task and beginning the next. When his hands were busy, the saw, the plane, the sandpaper, the mind was almost quiet, following the rhythm of the work, the way a dog follows a path without thinking about direction. But the moment his hands stopped, the worry rushed in, like water filling a hole dug in wet sand, fast and from every side at once. One evening, when the last light was turning the sea, the color of old copper, he walked to the shore. The tide was going out. He sat on a flat rock that was still warm from the afternoon sun, and watched the waves pull back from the beach, each one leaving a thin line of foam on the sand that disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. He could feel the warmth of the stone through his trousers, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed and something faintly metallic that he had never been able to name. A fisherman was pulling in his nets nearby, working with the easy efficiency of someone who has done the same thing 10,000 times. His hands moved without hesitation, gathering the mesh, shaking free the bits of kelp and shell, folding the net into a loose pile on the sand. The carpenter watched him work, the rhythm of it, the confidence, the complete absence of second-guessing. "You never seem worried," the carpenter said. The fisherman laughed, a short, warm sound. "I worry every day. The nets might be empty. The boat might take on water. The weather might turn when I am too far from shore to make it back easily. Then how do you sleep at night?" The fisherman paused, his hands still tangled in the net. He seemed to consider the question seriously, as if no one had ever asked him this before. The waves moved behind him, steady and unhurried. "I sleep because the worrying is finished for the day," he said. "The nets are in. The boat is tied. The fish are counted, or they are not. Whatever tomorrow brings, it will bring it, whether I lie awake thinking about it or not." He looked at the carpenter with kind eyes, eyes that had spent a lifetime squinting into sun and salt spray. The sea does not ask the shore for permission to come and go. It just moves. The tide comes in. The tide goes out. Your thoughts are the same. They come in, they go out. You do not have to stand at the edge and watch every wave. The carpenter sat with this for a long time after the fisherman had gone. The sky darkened slowly, the way it does near the sea, not all at once, but in layers, each shade of blue deeper than the last. The first stars appeared, faint at first, then brighter. The way things become clearer when you stop trying so hard to see them. He listened to the sea, not trying to hear anything in particular, just letting the sound be what it was. A rhythm that had been going on long before he was born and would continue long after he was gone. And he noticed something small. His shoulders had dropped. His jaw had loosened. His breath had found a pace he had not chosen, slower and deeper than usual. The worry was still there, somewhere at the edges, but it had moved from the center of his chest to somewhere further away, present, but no longer pressing against him, like a sound in the next room, like rain on a window you are not looking through. He walked home in the dark. The streets were empty. His workshop smelled of cedar and linseed oil, and the sawdust on the floor was soft under his bare feet. When he lay down, he could hear the sea through the open window, that old, patient, endless rhythm. He did not try to sleep. He did not try not to think. He simply lay there, and the thoughts came and went, like waves on a shore that had no opinion about whether they arrived or departed. Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen teacher, who spent his life watching minds, his own and many others, once said something very simple about all of this. He said that the mind in meditation is like the sky. Clouds pass through it. Sometimes dark clouds, heavy with rain, sometimes light ones that barely leave a shadow. But the sky is never damaged by the clouds. It does not need to be cleaned after a storm. It does not need to be repaired or restored. It is always underneath everything, exactly what it is, open, vast and undisturbed. Tonight your mind may be full of clouds. That is all right. The clouds are not you. They are just weather, and weather, as anyone who has lived near the sea can tell you, always passes. There is an old Zen story, very short, almost too short to be called a story at all, about a student who came to his teacher after many years of practice. The student was frustrated. His face was tight, his hands were clenched, and his voice had the sharp edge of someone who has been patient for too long. I have been meditating for 10 years, the student said, and I still cannot quiet my mind. Every time I sit down, the thoughts come. Every time I close my eyes, the noise begins. What am I doing wrong? The teacher did not answer right away. He reached to the small table beside him, where a brass bell sat among a clutter of incense sticks and smooth stones. He picked up the bell and struck it once, a clear, bright note that hung in the air between them, like a thread of light. They both listened as the sound slowly faded, growing thinner and thinner, until it was not so much heard as felt, a vibration more than a noise, and then nothing, just the quiet room, just the sound of their breathing. Did you hear that? The teacher asked. The student nodded. The bell did not try to be silent. The teacher said, it simply rang, and then the silence came on its own. That is perhaps the gentlest thing anyone has ever said about the mind that will not rest. You do not have to force the silence. You only have to let the ringing finish. And it always finishes. Every thought, every worry, every replay of the day, every rehearsal of tomorrow, they all have a natural end. They ring and then they fade, and then there is a space, a pause, a breath width of nothing. You have felt this space before. It is the gap between one thought and the next, the quiet that exists, not because you created it, but because it was always there, underneath everything, the way the sky is always there behind the clouds. Thich Nhat Hanh, who spent his whole life teaching people the art of being present, once put it this way. He said that the present moment is the only moment where life is available. Not tomorrow, not the conversation you wish you had handled differently, not the worry about what might happen next week, just this breath, just this heartbeat, just the weight of your body on whatever is holding you right now. And perhaps as you hear this, something has already begun to shift. Not dramatically, not the way the books describe it, but quietly. Perhaps the breath has slowed without you deciding to slow it. Perhaps the muscles behind your eyes have softened just a fraction. Perhaps the space between your thoughts has grown just a little wider, wide enough to rest in, even if only for a moment. This is not something you need to hold on to. It is not a state to achieve or a feeling to maintain. It is simply what happens when you stop trying so hard to make the mind behave. The stillness was always there. You just stopped standing in front of it. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey together. The shoulders, the jaw, the small muscles around the eyes that work so hard during the day and so rarely get permission to stop. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another thread I would like to follow tonight. one that has to do with the strange and beautiful thing that happens when we stop trying to control what was never ours to control. It begins with a woman who grew orchids, and a question she never thought to ask. In a town built along a canal, where the water moved so slowly it looked like it was not moving at all, there lived a woman who grew orchids. Her greenhouse was attached to the back of her house, a narrow structure of old glass and iron framing that had belonged to her grandmother before her. The glass was thick and slightly green with age, and the light that came through it had a softness to it, a warmth as if the sun had been strained through silk before it reached the plants. The air inside was always damp, always fragrant, a living, breathing warmth that wrapped around you. The moment you stepped through the door, the stone floor was uneven and cool underfoot, and, in the corners, moss grew in small green patches that she never bothered to scrub away. She liked the moss. It made the place feel less like something she had built and more like something that had grown on its own. On warm afternoons, she would open the small side vent, and the smell of the canal, that particular mixture of still water and damp stone, and the faintest sweetness of algae, would drift in and mingle with the earthy perfume of the orchids. It was the smell of her life, and she breathed it the way other people breathe without thinking, except that she always noticed it, always paused for half a second when it reached her, the way you pause when you hear a song you have not heard in years. She had been growing orchids for most of her adult life. She knew their moods the way a mother knows the cries of her children. This one needs more shade. That one is thirsty. This one is simply being difficult, because that is its nature. Her hands were always slightly damp and always smelled of earth, and there was a permanent crescent of soil beneath each fingernail that no amount of scrubbing could remove. She did not mind this. It felt like evidence of something, proof that she had been doing real work, work that left marks. But the woman had a problem, and the problem was this: she could not stop adjusting. She moved the pots daily, this one closer to the window, that one further back. This one turned 15 degrees to face the afternoon light. She checked the soil with her fingers 3 times a day, pressing into the earth to feel for moisture, the way a doctor presses a wrist to feel for a pulse. She mixed her own fertilizer from recipes she had been refining for years, measuring each ingredient with the precision of someone who believes that perfection is simply a matter of getting the proportions right. And when, despite all of this, an orchid failed, when a bloom drooped or a leaf yellowed or a root turned soft and dark, she took it personally, not as a gardener taking a loss, but as a person who had been betrayed by something she had trusted. One spring, her finest orchid, a pale violet one that had bloomed faithfully every year for nearly a decade, began to wilt. She adjusted the light. She changed the soil. She moved it to 3 different spots in 2 days. She misted it. She stopped misting it. She read everything she could find about orchid diseases and tried remedies she had never tried before. Nothing worked. The leaves curled inward, one by one, like fingers closing into a fist. Her neighbor, an old man who grew nothing but tomatoes and seemed entirely content with this, watched her carry the pot from one end of the greenhouse to the other for the 3rd time that afternoon. He was leaning on the low wall that separated their gardens, a tomato in one hand, the other hand resting on the warm stone. "What are you doing to that plant?" he asked. "I am trying to save it," she said, not looking up. "It looks to me like you are trying to control it." She stopped. The pot was heavy in her arms, and the soil was damp against her shirt. "There is a difference," she said. "Is there?" He took a bite of the tomato, Juice ran down his chin, and he wiped it with the back of his hand. When I plant a tomato seed, I put it in the dirt. I water it and then I leave it alone. The plant knows what to do. It has known for longer than either of us have been alive. Orchids are not tomatoes. She said, tomatoes are simple. You put them in the ground and they grow. Orchids they are complicated. They need specific conditions, specific humidity, specific light. The old man nodded slowly, chewing. And yet the orchids in the forest seem to manage without you. He said she had no answer for that. No, he agreed. Orchids are not tomatoes, but they are still plants. And plants, in my experience, do not enjoy being fussed over. They enjoy being left in peace. He looked at the orchid in her arms, the curling leaves, the drooping stem. Perhaps what it needs is not another adjustment. Perhaps what it needs is for you to set it down and walk away. She did not believe him, but she was tired of carrying the pot, tired of checking, tired of the constant low hum of anxiety that had become the background noise of her days. So she set the orchid on the stone ledge by the canal-side window, the spot where the light was gentlest, and the air moved slowly through the gap in the old frame, and she walked away. She went inside, closed the greenhouse door behind her, and for the first time in weeks, she did not go back to check before bed. In the morning, nothing had changed. The leaves were still curled. The stem still drooped. But she noticed something she had not noticed before. The morning light was coming through the canal-side window at a low angle, catching the edges of the leaves in gold. And there, at the base of the lowest branch, so small she had to lean close to be sure, was a bud, a tiny, almost invisible bud, pale green and tightly furled, forming in the one place she had not been watching. Not where she had been looking, not where she had been directing all her attention and effort, but in the one place she had neglected, the quiet underside, the part of the plant that had been left alone long enough to do what it was always going to do. The Buddha once offered a teaching that the old neighbor might have recognized, though he had never read a word of scripture in his life. The Buddha said that suffering arises not from what happens to us, but from our insistence that things be other than what they are. He called this clinging upadana, and he described it not as a dramatic failing, but as a quiet habit. The way a hand closes around something precious without the person even noticing they are gripping. You know this grip. You may be feeling it right now, in the jaw, perhaps, or in the space between the shoulder blades, or in the belly, where worry likes to settle when the lights go out. It is the grip of wanting things to be different, wanting the day to have gone differently, wanting the mind to be quieter, wanting sleep to come faster, and the strange, counterintuitive truth that the orchid grower discovered is the same truth the Buddha pointed to 2,500 years ago. The grip itself is the problem, not what you are gripping. The holding on, the inability to set the pot down and walk away. Dogen, the great Zen master, once wrote that to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be awakened by all things. What he meant, in the simplest language, is that when you stop insisting on being the one in charge, when you stop adjusting and measuring and controlling, the world has a chance to show you something you could never have arranged on your own. There was a monk, not old, not young, somewhere in that uncertain middle, where the body still works, but the certainties of youth have begun to soften at the edges, who lived in a monastery on a hillside where the wind never fully stopped. It was a quiet place, built of stone and old timber, and the wind moved through it constantly, through the gaps in the shutters. under the doors across the courtyard, where the monks walked in slow circles every morning before dawn. You could hear it at all hours, a low, steady presence that was neither peaceful nor disturbing, but simply there, the way your own heartbeat is there, constant, unasked for, easy to forget until someone reminds you to listen. The floors of the meditation hall were smooth, dark wood, worn to a soft sheen by decades of bare feet crossing them in the same paths. In the mornings, the light came in through the eastern windows in long slanting columns that were thick with dust motes, and the younger monks sometimes watched the dust drift and turn in the light when they should have been watching their breath. The air smelled of old wood and sandalwood incense, and, in the winter, of the charcoal that burned in the small iron brazier near the abbot's seat. This monk had spent many years trying to perfect his meditation. He sat every morning and every evening, his back straight, his hands folded, his eyes half closed in the way he had been taught. And every session, without fail, his mind wandered. It wandered to the meal he had eaten that morning. Whether the rice had been slightly overcooked, whether he had taken more than his share. It wandered to a conversation he had had with a younger monk who had asked him a question he could not answer. It wandered to his father, who was growing old in a village far from here, and whom he had not seen in 3 years. He had tried every technique he knew. He counted breaths. He watched thoughts arise and labeled them. Thinking, planning, remembering, the way he had been taught. He returned his attention to the breath again and again, like a patient dog retrieving a stick that keeps being thrown. But the mind would not cooperate, and the failure, or what he experienced as failure, had begun to harden into something heavier: shame, the quiet, corrosive belief that he was not built for this, that other monks could do what he could not, that there was something fundamentally wrong with the way his mind was wired. One evening after a session that had felt particularly scattered, he went to the abbot. The abbot was very old, so old that his skin had become nearly translucent, and you could see the blue veins in his hands like rivers on a map. He was sitting by the window, watching the wind move through the grass on the hillside. He did not turn when the younger monk entered. "I cannot control my mind," the monk said. "I have tried for years. I sit and the thoughts come. I push them away, and they come back. I am failing." The abbot was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the room, lifting the edge of a cloth on the table, then setting it down. "Who told you that you were supposed to control it?" the abbot asked. The monk opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. No one had told him exactly. He had simply assumed, the way we all assume, that meditation meant conquering the mind, forcing it into stillness, the way you force a door shut against the wind. The abbot turned from the window then and looked at him. His eyes were very clear, the kind of clear that comes not from certainty, but from having let go of the need for it. "Controlling the mind," he said, "is like trying to smooth water with your hand. Every touch creates a new ripple. Then what am I supposed to do?" the monk asked. His voice was thin, almost desperate. "Sit with me," the abbot said. They sat together in silence. The wind blew. The monk's mind wandered to the conversation, to the grass, to the sound of the wind itself. But the abbot sat beside him like a mountain, unmoving, unhurried, and something about his presence made the wandering feel less like failure and more like breathing, just something that happened, just something the mind did. The way the wind moved through the grass, without anyone asking it to stop. After a long while, the abbot spoke again. "The wind does not try to stop blowing," he said. "The grass does not try to stop bending. You are sitting here trying to become something you already are. The stillness you are looking for is not on the other side of your thoughts. It is underneath them. It has been there the whole time. The monk did not understand, not that night. But something in him loosened, a small knot somewhere behind the ribs that had been tied for years without him knowing it was there. He went back to his room and lay on his narrow bed, and the wind came through the shutters as it always did, and the thoughts came as they always did, and for the first time in a very long time, he did not fight them. He let them blow through him, the way the wind blew through the monastery, touching everything, holding nothing, moving on. And somewhere in that allowing, somewhere in the space between the thoughts, he was no longer chasing. He felt the bed beneath him, solid and simple, and the rough wool of the blanket against his chin, and the cool air on his face. And he realized that this, just this, was enough. Not perfect, not enlightened, just enough. Pema Chödrön, the Buddhist teacher, who has spent her life helping people befriend their own difficult minds, once said something that might have saved the orchid grower years of struggle. She said that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Not the worry, not the restlessness, not the thoughts that circle back at midnight. They are not enemies to be defeated. They are visitors, awkward, uninvited, sometimes exhausting, but visitors nonetheless. And visitors eventually leave on their own. There is a story, barely more than a breath, really, that has been told so many times in so many villages that no one remembers where it started. It is about a farmer who lived at the edge of a valley where the grass was tall and the sky was wide. One morning, he walked out to his field and found a wild horse standing there, a strong, dark horse with a mane like black water, standing perfectly still in the early light. The farmer's neighbors came to congratulate him. "What good fortune," they said. The farmer shrugged. "Perhaps," he said. The next day, his son tried to ride the horse and fell, breaking his leg. The neighbors came again. "What terrible luck," they said. The farmer shrugged again. "Perhaps," he said. The following week, soldiers came through the village, conscripting every young man for the war. They passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. The neighbors marveled, "What wonderful fortune." And the farmer once more simply said, "Perhaps," that single word, perhaps, is the sound of a hand opening. It is the sound of someone setting down the need to know, the need to judge, the need to decide whether this moment is good or bad, lucky or unlucky, right or wrong. It is the sound of someone allowing life to be what it is, without adding a story on top of it. Tonight, as you lie here, you might try that word on for size. Not as a practice, not as a technique, just as a feeling. The mind says tomorrow will be difficult. And instead of agreeing or arguing, you simply breathe and think. Perhaps the mind says, "I should have done things differently today." And you breathe and you think, perhaps, not dismissing, not denying, just loosening the grip, one finger at a time. Perhaps your hands have already begun to soften where they rest. Perhaps the breath has found its own rhythm, slower than the one you started with, deeper than the one the day demanded. This is not something you are doing. This is something that happens when you stop standing guard. The body knows how to rest. It has always known. It was only waiting for the mind to step aside. An old Zen saying puts it as plainly as anything can be put. Do not seek the truth. It says simply cease to cherish opinions. The truth does not need to be found. It needs to be uncovered. And the uncovering happens not by digging, but by letting go of what is piled on top. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the quiet that has gathered around you since we began. It was not brought here. It was already in the room. You are simply noticing it now. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else I would like to share with you tonight. Something about the art of waiting, not the anxious kind of waiting, where the mind races ahead to the thing it wants, but the other kind, the kind where you sit down and you stop reaching, and you let the next moment arrive in its own time. It begins with a boy who wanted to see the stars. There was a boy, no older than 10 or 11, small for his age, with the kind of restless energy that made his mother say he had been born running and never learned to stop, who wanted to see the stars. Not in the casual way that children want things, where the wanting comes and goes like weather. This was a deep wanting, the kind that settles into the bones and stays. He lived in a village at the bottom of a valley, where the mountains rose steep on every side, and the trees were tall and thick and old. The forest canopy was so dense that even on the brightest nights, when the moon was full and the sky was clear, you could see only small fragments of it through the gaps in the leaves, a scattering of light, a suggestion of something vast, but never the whole thing. Never the full sky, never the stars in their enormity. The boy's father was a woodcutter who left before dawn every morning and returned after dark, smelling of pine sap and sweat and the cold metallic scent of the axe blade. His mother kept the house, a small stone structure with a thatched roof and a hearth that she fed with the offcuts his father brought home. The house was warm and close and always smelled of wood smoke and the dried herbs she hung from the ceiling beams in small tied bundles. Lavender, rosemary, sage. At night, the fire threw moving shadows on the walls, and the boy would lie on his pallet near the hearth and watch them dance. And beyond the shadows, through the single small window above his head, he could see a patch of sky no larger than his two hands held together. And in that patch, if the night was clear, he could see 3 stars. Sometimes 4. It was not enough. He wanted to see all of them. One afternoon, he walked to the edge of the village, where an old woman lived alone in a house that was half overgrown with ivy. She was known in the village as someone who had traveled far when she was young, across mountains and deserts and oceans, and who had come back and never left again. People said she had seen things. They did not say what things. The boy did not care about the things. He cared about the stars. I want to see the sky. He told her the whole sky, not just the pieces. The old woman was sitting on a low stool outside her door, shelling beans into a wooden bowl. Her fingers moved with a slow, practiced rhythm. Crack, split drop, crack, split drop. The sound was soft and regular, like a very quiet heartbeat. Then you will need to climb, she said without looking up. Climb what? The mountain. She tilted her head toward the peak that rose above the eastern edge of the valley, the tallest one, the one whose top was always bare and gray above the tree line. Above the trees, there is nothing between you and the sky. But it is a long climb, 2 days, perhaps 3. I can run it in 1, the boy said. The old woman looked at him then. Her eyes were dark and deeply lined, the kind of eyes that have seen enough to stop being surprised, but not enough to stop being amused. You can try, she said, but the mountain does not care how fast you run. He left the next morning. He packed bread and dried fruit and a skin of water, and he ran up the first slope, through the lower forest, where the trees were broad, and the undergrowth thick, and the path was soft, with decades of fallen leaves. He ran until his legs burned, and his breath came in short, sharp gasps. By midday he had reached the middle elevation, where the trees grew thinner, and the air was cooler, and the light had a different quality, sharper, cleaner, as if it had been washed. He stopped to eat, gulping his food without tasting it, and then he ran again. By evening he was exhausted, his legs ached, his feet were blistered inside his shoes. He had made it past the middle forest, but the upper slopes stretched above him, steep, rocky, and far longer than they had looked from below. He sat on a boulder and looked up, and through the thinning canopy he could see more sky than he had ever seen before. A wide dark blue, deepening toward violet with the first faint stars beginning to appear. But it was not enough. The trees still blocked most of it. The full sky was still above him, still out of reach. He slept on the ground that night, curled against the cold, and in the morning he could barely walk. His legs were stiff and swollen. His blisters had opened and stuck to the inside of his shoes. He limped upward for an hour, then two, making almost no progress. By noon he turned around and went home. The old woman was shelling beans again when he arrived, as if she had not moved. She looked at his face, flushed, frustrated, defeated, and she said nothing. She just kept shelling. Crack, split, drop. The mountain is too far, the boy said. The mountain is exactly where it has always been, she said. You were simply in too much of a hurry to meet it. How else am I supposed to get there? She set the bolster aside and looked at him the way you look at a bird that keeps flying into the same window. With patience, with something that might have been love. You walk, she said slowly. You rest when your body asks you to rest. You eat when you are hungry. You sleep when the light goes. You do not think about the top, you think about the step you are taking right now. This step, this one, and you let the mountain come to you. That will take forever, the boy said. It will take exactly as long as it takes, she said. Which is not forever. It only feels like forever when you are trying to make it shorter. She picked up the bowl again and returned to the beans. Crack, split, drop. The mountain has been there since before your grandfather's grandfather was born. It is not going anywhere. It does not need you to be fast. It only needs you to keep walking. But I want to see the stars now, he said. And there was something in his voice that was not just impatience, but ache, the particular ache of wanting something beautiful that seems always just out of reach. I know, she said, and the way she said it, softly, without rushing, without trying to fix it, made him feel, for a moment, that the wanting itself was not something to be ashamed of, just something to carry more gently. He did not go back to the mountain that year, but he thought about what she had said, and the following spring, when the snow melted and the paths were clear. He went this time. He walked slowly, the way she had told him, feeling each step, the press of stone through his shoes, the shift of his weight from heel to toe, the way the air changed temperature as he climbed. He stopped when he was tired. He ate sitting on rocks that were warm from the sun. He slept when the darkness came, not grudgingly, but gratefully, wrapping himself in his blanket and listening to the sounds the mountain made at night. The creak of trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft rush of water somewhere he could not see. On the morning of the third day, he walked above the tree line. The last stunted pines gave way to bare rock and low scrub, and the sky opened above him like a door that had been closed his whole life and was now finally wide. He stood there for a long time. The wind moved through his hair and across his face, cool and steady and clean, and the sky was enormous, not just above him, but around him, stretching in every direction. Horizon to horizon, filled with a light so clear it seemed to have weight. He could see the valley far below, small and dark and distant, and the village where his house was, and the thin thread of smoke from his mother's chimney. He could see the old woman's house at the edge of the trees. He could see how small everything was from up here, and how beautiful, and how the smallness and the beauty were the same thing. He waited there until nightfall, sitting on a flat stone with his blanket around his shoulders. And when the stars came, they came not in fragments, not in the small patches he had seen through the window above his bed, but in their full and overwhelming entirety, thousands of them. Millions, a river of light that poured across the darkness from one edge of the world to the other. He did not think about the climb. He did not think about the blisters, or the cold, or the 3 days it had taken. He simply stood there, and the stars stood with him, and the mountain held them both in its enormous quiet palm. The Buddha once said that a water jug fills drop by drop, not all at once, not in a rush, just one drop, then another, and then one day the jug is full, and you did not see the moment it happened because you were not watching for it. You were simply living one drop at a time. Tonight, you do not need to be anywhere other than where you are. You do not need to be further along, not in healing, not in understanding, not in becoming the person you think you should be by now. You do not need to have solved the things that are unsolved, or healed the things that are still healing, or arrived at some place of peace that feels impossibly far away. The boy wanted to see the stars, and he saw them, but not by running, by walking, by resting, by letting the mountain set the pace. You are where you are. And that for tonight is the only step that matters, the only breath, the only heartbeat. There was a woman who understood this differently. She was a baker, had been for 30 years, since she was barely old enough to reach the counter in her mother's kitchen. She worked in a small bakery in a town where the river ran wide and slow and muddy, the kind of river that looked like it was going nowhere, but was actually moving all the time, carrying silt and leaves and small branches toward the sea, with a patience that was easy to mistake for laziness. The bakery opened before dawn. She arrived at 4 every morning, when the streets were empty, and the town was nothing but shadows, and the sound of her own footsteps on cobblestones. The ovens took an hour to heat, and she used that hour to prepare the dough, measuring flour by feel, adding water a little at a time, working the mixture with her hands until it reached the consistency she wanted. She could feel the dough changing under her palms, the way a musician can hear a note changing, a shift in texture, a softening, a moment where resistance becomes yielding. It was not something she could explain. It was something her hands knew. The bakery was always warm, even in winter, when the air outside was sharp enough to hurt your lungs. The air inside was soft and fragrant and close, heavy with the smell of yeast and flour and the sweet, complex warmth of bread in the oven. The walls were thick stone, darkened by years of heat, and the wooden counts were worn smooth and pale in the places where her hands had rested day after day, decade after decade. There was a small window above the sink that looked out onto the alley, and in the early mornings, before the sun was up, she could see the reflection of the oven's glow in the glass, a warm orange rectangle floating in the darkness like a lantern. A young man had come to work with her recently, her nephew, sent by his mother to learn a trade. He was eager and quick and impatient, in the way that young people are impatient, the way that makes them want to skip to the end of every process. How long does the dough need to rise? He asked on his first morning, standing over the bowl with his hands on his hips, frowning at the pale lump as if it were deliberately keeping him waiting. As long as it needs, she said. But how long is that? It depends on the weather, on the flower, on whether the yeast is feeling generous today. She smiled, a small, crooked smile that had more warmth in it than most people's laughter. You cannot rush bread. If you try, if you push the temperature too high, if you punch the dough down before it is ready, if you open the oven too soon, you get something that looks like bread but tastes like nothing, like cardboard with a crust. The rising is not waiting. The rising is the work. It is just work you cannot see. So I just stand here, he said, incredulous. You just stand here, she said, or you clean the counters, or you sweep the floor, or you watch the light come through the window and notice how it changes color as the sun comes up. There is always something to do when you stop needing something to happen. He did not understand this for many weeks. He would check the dough every few minutes, lifting the cloth, peering underneath, poking the surface with his finger, and she would gently replace the cloth and say, "Leave it be. It knows what it is doing." Thich Nhat Hanh once compared the practice of patience to planting a seed. You put it in the earth, he said, and then you water it and give it sunlight, and then you wait. You do not dig it up every morning to see if it has grown. You trust the process. You trust the seed. You trust the earth. And in its own time, not yours, not the schedule you had in mind, the green shoot appears. And then one morning, weeks later, the young man was standing by the oven, waiting for the first loaves to finish. She watched him from across the room. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, and his face had changed. Not relaxed, exactly, but settled. The frantic energy had gone somewhere quieter. He was not checking the clock. He was not opening the oven door. He was simply standing there, in the warm golden light, breathing in the smell of bread that was almost but not yet ready. His hands hung loose at his sides. His shoulders were low, and there was something in his posture, a looseness, an ease, a willingness to wait, that told her he had learned the thing she had been trying to teach him, not about bread. About time, about trust, about the particular grace that comes from letting things take, as long as they take, and discovering that the taking is not empty time, but full time, filled with warmth and fragrance, and the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where you are. Zen master Huang Po once said something very simple about all of this. He said, "Do not permit the events of your daily life to bind you, but never withdraw yourself from them." Which is another way of saying, be here, be in the rising, be in the waiting. Do not skip ahead. Do not try to force the dough. Just be in the warm kitchen, with the smell of flour in the air, and the oven glowing in the window, and let the bread become bread in its own quiet time. Perhaps this is something you can feel right now. The slow pace of this night, the unhurried way the hours are moving. There is no deadline for sleep. There is no alarm that says you must be unconscious by a certain time. The night is long and generous, and it will hold you for as long as you need to be held. Your breath is already slowing, not because you decided to slow it, but because the body has been listening to these stories, and it has its own wisdom about when to let go and when to simply drift. The muscles in your face have softened. The weight of the day is settling downward, through the chest, through the belly, knee, into the mattress, into whatever is holding you. You do not need to do anything about this. It is already happening. Let us rest here for a moment. The night is still young, and there is no rush. Take a breath that is as slow as you want it to be. Feel the heaviness in your limbs. It is a good heaviness, the kind that comes after a long day, when the body finally gets permission to stop. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quieter thread waiting for us now. One about the beauty of a simple life and the strange peace that comes when you stop adding and start taking away. It begins in a kitchen where a man is washing a single bowl. There is something about a clean bowl. You have felt it, perhaps, the particular satisfaction of holding a bowl that has just been washed, the glaze still warm from the water, the surface smooth and empty and ready for nothing at all. It is such a small thing, hardly worth mentioning. And yet in that small thing, something enormous is hiding, the same enormity that hides in a made bed, in a swept floor, in the moment after you have finished a task. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that needs to happen next. Zen master Joshu was once asked by a new monk what the deepest truth of Zen was, and Joshu, who could have spoken about emptiness, or enlightenment, or the nature of the universe, said only this: "Have you eaten your rice?" The monk said yes. "Then wash your bowl." Joshu said, "That was the entire teaching. The whole of it. In 5 words, wash your bowl." A traveling merchant once arrived in a monastery high in the mountains, where the air was thin and sharp and tasted of snow, even in summer. He was not a religious man. He had come because the road passed through, and because the monastery offered travelers a place to sleep and a meal in exchange for whatever small offering they could make: a coin, a candle, a handful of rice. The merchant had been traveling for weeks, moving between towns with his cart of fabrics and spices, and he was exhausted in the way that people who are always moving are exhausted, not from any single effort, but from the accumulated weight of never stopping. His shoulders were tight. His jaw ached from clenching it against the cold mountain wind. His mind was a list of numbers, prices, quantities, debts owed, debts owing, that scrolled behind his eyes, even when he closed them. The monastery was plain: stone walls, wooden floors worn smooth and dark, small windows that let in more cold than light. The meditation hall was empty, except for cushions arranged in rows and a single brass incense holder near the front wall that held the stub of a stick long since burned down. There was nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. The walls were bare. The floors were bare. Even the monks who moved through the corridors seemed somehow pared down, reduced to essentials, their robes simple, their movements unhurried, their faces neither happy nor sad, but settled in a way the merchant had never seen on a human face before. He was given a room, a small cell with a straw mat, a thin blanket, and a wooden shelf on which sat a single bowl, a single cup, and a small clay pitcher of water, nothing else. The merchant stood in the doorway and looked at the room and felt something he could not name, something between discomfort and relief. It was like stepping into a building after a storm and hearing the sudden absence of wind. At dinner, he sat with the monks in the hall. The room was lit by candles, not many, just enough to see by, their flames small and steady in the still air. The shadows they cast were soft and warm, moving gently on the stone walls, like something alive and breathing. The meal was simple: rice, pickled vegetables, a clear broth with small pieces of tofu floating in it like pale clouds. There was no conversation. The monks ate in silence. They held their bowls with both hands, the way you might hold something given to you by someone you loved. They chewed slowly. They paused between bites. One monk near the end of the table closed his eyes as he ate, and the merchant could not tell if he was savoring the food, or praying, or simply resting in the act of chewing. When they finished, each monk washed his own bowl at a stone basin near the door. The basin was old, the stone worn smooth in a shallow curve where thousands of bowls had been washed before, thousands of hands turning them slowly under the water. The monks washed with the same deliberate care they had brought to eating, as if the washing were not a task to complete, but a continuation of the meal, a final course made of water and attention. The merchant watched this with the impatience of a man who has never once washed a dish without also planning tomorrow's route. He ate quickly as he always did, barely tasting the broth, his mind already running numbers, the pass he needed to cross before noon. The town on the other side, the customer, who was expecting a delivery of indigo cloth and would dock the price if it arrived late. When he finished, he set down his bowl and stood to leave, and the monk beside him, a quiet, middle-aged man with a face like weathered stone and hands that looked like they had spent their whole life doing one careful thing after another, touched his arm gently. "Your bowl," the monk said. "What about it? You have not washed it." The merchant looked down at the bowl in his hand. There were a few grains of rice stuck to the inside, and a thin film of broth. "Someone will wash it later," he said. The monk shook his head, not with disapproval, but with something gentler. "Here we wash our own bowls," he said. "It is not a chore. It is the end of the meal. The meal is not finished until the bowl is clean." The merchant carried his bowl to the basin. The water was warm, surprisingly warm for a monastery this high in the mountains. And later he would learn that it was heated over a small fire that the youngest monk tended every evening, because the abbot believed that warm water was a kindness, and that kindness in small things was the only kind that mattered. He dipped the bowl in, and without thinking about it, without deciding to, he began to wash slowly, the way the monks had done, running his thumb along the bottom of the inside curve of the clay, feeling the grains of rice loosen and fall away one by one, feeling the surface become smooth again under his fingers. The water moved over his hands, warm and constant and patient. The sound of it was soft, almost musical, a gentle splashing that seemed to fill the silence without breaking it. And something happened that he did not expect. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, perhaps longer than he cared to admit, his mind stopped scrolling. The list of numbers fell quiet. The plans for tomorrow dissolved like the grains of rice in the warm water. There was only the bowl, and the water, and his hands, and the smooth warm curve of the clay against his palms. He stood there longer than he needed to. The bowl was clean, but he kept holding it under the water, not wanting to leave this strange, unexpected stillness. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. He could hear his own breathing. And both of these things, heartbeat, breath, seemed suddenly miraculous, not because they were new, but because he had finally stopped long enough to notice them. When he set the bowl on the drying rack and turned around, the monk who had spoken to him was still there, wiping down the edge of the basin with a cloth. "You felt it," the monk said. "Not a question. I do not know what I felt," the merchant said. "You felt the bowl," the monk said and smiled. An old Zen saying puts it this way: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The work does not change. The grand revelation is that there is no grand revelation. There is only this, the thing in front of you, done with care, done with attention, done without rushing toward the next thing. And in that careful doing, something opens. A door you did not know existed. A room you did not know you had been looking for. You may notice this in your own life. Those moments when the mind goes quiet, not because you silenced it, but because you gave it something simple to follow. Washing dishes, folding laundry, walking to the mailbox and back. The body moves and the mind, for once, moves with it. instead of running ahead. It is not meditation. It is not a technique. It is just what happens when life gets simple enough for the mind to stop narrating it. There was a woman who discovered this late in her life, though the seeds of it had been there all along. She was a retired school teacher who had spent 40 years managing classrooms and curricula and parent conferences and the 1,000 small emergencies that fill a teacher's day the way water fills a jar, completely leaving no room for air. She had been good at it. Organized, efficient, the kind of teacher who always had a plan, a backup plan, and a backup to the backup. Her desk was always neat. Her files were color-coded. Her calendar was full from morning to night. Every hour accounted for. Every task assigned its slot. And then she retired, and the calendar went blank. The first Monday morning, she woke at 5:30 out of habit. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and waited for the urgency to arrive. The familiar rush of adrenaline that had pulled her out of bed every weekday for 4 decades. It did not come. The house was quiet. The alarm clock ticked. The light crept in around the curtains, grey and unhurried. She got up eventually, made coffee, and stood in the kitchen in her bathrobe, holding the cup with both hands, looking at the day stretching out in front of her like an empty road with no destination. She had looked forward to this, to the freedom, the open space, the luxury of having nothing to do. But the reality of it was different from the fantasy. The empty hours did not feel spacious. They felt enormous and shapeless, like a room with no furniture, no walls, no sense of where to stand. She filled them the way she had always filled things, with plans. She joined committees. She volunteered at the library. She took a class in watercolor painting, then another in Italian, then another in garden design. Her calendar filled up again, and she felt the familiar satisfaction of boxes checked and hours accounted for. But the satisfaction was thin. It was the satisfaction of being busy, not the satisfaction of being alive. And underneath it, growing louder every week, was a tiredness that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. A tiredness that lived not in the body, but somewhere deeper in the place where purpose is supposed to be. One afternoon in late October, when the light was gold and low, and the garden was beginning to let go of its colors, she cancelled everything. She did not plan to. She simply woke up and could not bring herself to get dressed for the watercolor class. The brushes and paints sat in their bag by the front door, and she looked at them, the way you look at something you once loved, but can no longer remember why. She stayed in her kitchen, in her robe, and she made tea. Just tea, nothing else. She filled the kettle from the tap and set it on the stove and listened to the water begin to hiss. That soft, building sound that starts as a whisper and grows into a low rumble before the whistle comes. She measured the leaves, a careful spoonful of the green tea her daughter had brought back from a trip abroad, loose leaves that smelled of grass and smoke, and something faintly sweet she could never identify. She placed them in the pot, a small clay pot her mother had used, chipped at the rim, warm brown. The glaze cracked in a pattern that looked like the branches of a winter tree. She poured the water over the leaves and watched the color bloom, pale gold at first, almost transparent, then amber, then a deep warm brown that reminded her of autumn light on old wood. The steam rose in a thin curl that caught the morning sun from the window and turned briefly silver before disappearing into the still air above the table. She sat down with both hands around the cup and drank the tea slowly, tasting each sip, the warmth first, then the bitterness, then a sweetness that arrived late and lingered after the swallow, coating the back of her throat like honey. It took her 15 minutes. 15 minutes of doing nothing but drinking tea, and in those 15 minutes, the tiredness that had been living beneath everything, the planning, the scheduling, the frantic filling of empty hours shifted. It did not disappear, but it loosened. The way a knot loosens when you stop pulling both ends and simply hold the rope still. She began to do this every morning. Just the tea. No phone on the table. No newspaper folded to the crossword. No list of things to accomplish, pinned to the refrigerator. With the magnets her grandchildren had given her, just the kettle, the cup, the leaves, the steam, the light. Some mornings she sat for 10 minutes. Some mornings she sat for an hour, watching the tea grow cold, watching the light shift across the table, watching the way the shadows of the window frame moved slowly from one side of the wall to the other. Like the hand of a very patient clock, she began to notice things she had never noticed in 40 years of living in this house. The way the morning light was blue before it was gold. The way the refrigerator hummed in a pitch that changed slightly when the compressor kicked on. The way the steam from her cup rose straight up when the air was still, and drifted sideways when the heat came on and moved the air from the vent above the stove. She watched the seasons change through the kitchen window, the garden going from green to gold, to bare branches, to snow, to the first small green shoots pushing through the cold, dark earth. And she discovered, slowly over months, that the simplest moments were not the ones she needed to fill. They were the ones she needed to protect. The empty space was not a problem to solve. It was the answer she had been looking for all along. The Buddha himself lived a life of radical simplicity, though he came to it the long way around. Before he was a teacher, he was a prince, surrounded by luxury, by silk and gold and gardens and servants who anticipated his every need before he could feel it. He had more than any person could use, more than any person could want. And he walked away from all of it, not because the luxury was wrong, not because the gold was evil or the gardens were sinful, but because it was loud, or all of it, the comfort, the abundance, the constant availability of more, filled every corner of the mind with wanting. Wanting more, wanting different, wanting the next thing before the current thing was finished. And in that constant wanting, there was no room, no quiet, no pause, no gap in the noise to hear the voice underneath. The voice that says this is enough, this moment, this breath, this cup of tea in this kitchen, in this morning light. This is enough. Shunryu Suzuki, centuries later, said it more simply. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Simplicity is the beginner's mind. It is the willingness to see one thing clearly, rather than 10 things vaguely. Tonight, lying here, you are already in the simplest possible moment. There is nothing to plan. There is nothing to organize. There is no calendar, no schedule, no list of things that need to happen before you can rest. There is only this, the dark, the quiet, the feeling of your body against the bed, the slow rhythm of your breathing. You have already arrived at the place the school teacher spent months discovering. You are already in the kitchen, with the tea, with the steam, with the light through the window. Perhaps your hands have grown heavier where they rest. Perhaps the jaw has softened another fraction. That small, almost invisible release that happens when you stop clenching against the day. Perhaps the thoughts that were circling when you first lay down have drifted further apart, like clouds moving slowly across a wide night sky, leaving more and more dark space between them. More and more quiet, more and more room to breathe. You do not need to notice this, but if you do notice it, you can let the noticing be another simple thing. Another bowl washed, Another sip of tea, another breath taken, without needing it to lead anywhere. Let us rest here in this simplicity for a moment. There is nothing to carry forward, nothing to hold on to. Just the breath, just the quiet, just the warmth of being still. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more thing I would like to share with you before the night deepens much further. It is about what happens when you stop fighting the moment you are in. When you stop wishing it were different, or better, or easier, and simply let it be exactly what it is. It begins with a fisherman's daughter who could not stop looking at the horizon. There was a fisherman's daughter who could not stop looking at the horizon. She lived in a village where the houses were built of driftwood and stone, and the roofs were weighted with heavy rocks to keep them from lifting in the autumn storms. The village sat at the edge of a bay where the water was usually calm, a wide, flat silver-grey expanse that reflected the sky so perfectly on still mornings that you could not tell where the water ended and the air began. The air always smelled of salt and fish, and the tarry ropes that hung in coils on the dock pilings. And underneath those smells, something older, the deep mineral scent of the sea itself, the smell of a thing that has been there longer than anything, with a name. Her father went out every morning before dawn. She would hear him moving through the house in the dark, the creak of the floorboards, the soft clink of his thermos, the heavy thud of the door closing. Behind him, by the time she woke, his boat would already be a small dark shape on the water, growing smaller as it moved toward the open sea. And she would stand at the kitchen window and watch it go. And she would feel something in her chest that was not quite sadness and not quite longing, but something in between, a pull, a reaching, a hunger for whatever was out there beyond the line where the water met the sky. She was not unhappy. That was the strange part, the part that confused her most. Her life was good, small but good, the way a well-built house is good, solid, and warm and enough. She had friends who knew her by name and by laugh, and by the particular way she walked slightly tilted forward, as if she were always leaning into a wind that was not there. She had work at the fish market, sorting the catch every morning, with hands that smelled of brine and scales. By noon, her fingers quick and sure among the silver bodies separating mackerel from herring, tossing the undersized ones back into the bucket for the cats that gathered at the market door every morning. Like a small patient congregation, she had the bay and the gulls and the changing light, the way the water looked silver in the morning and gold at noon and bronze in the evening and black at night, each color a different kind of beautiful. She had the sound of the water against the dock pilings at night, which was so constant and so steady that it had become the sound of silence itself, the sound of everything being exactly as it should be. And yet she could not stop looking at the horizon. She could not stop wondering what was on the other side of it. She could not stop feeling that this village, this bay, this life was somehow not enough, that the real thing, the important thing, the thing she was meant to find, was somewhere else. Somewhere she had not yet been, somewhere she could not see from where she stood. One evening she walked to the end of the dock, where her father's boat was tied. The sun was going down, and the water was the color of old bronze, and the sky was layered in pinks and golds that deepened into violet at the edges. Her father was sitting on an upturned crate, mending a net. His hands moved automatically, threading the shuttle through the mesh, with a speed and sureness that came from decades of doing the same motion, in the same light at the same time of day. His face was brown and deeply lined, the kind of face that looks carved from wood, hard and weathered on the outside. warm underneath. She sat beside him. For a while neither of them spoke. The water lapped against the pilings. A gull called somewhere out over the bay, a high thin sound that hung in the air like a question. "Do you ever wish you were somewhere else?" she asked. He did not look up from the net. "Where would I be? I do not know. Anywhere, somewhere different. Somewhere bigger." He was quiet for a long moment. The shuttle moved through the mesh, through pull in, through pull. The rhythm of it was as steady as breathing. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought the fish were always better in the next bay. I would sail past the headland, past the rocks, past the places I knew, looking for the spot where the water was deeper and the catch was bigger. I spent whole seasons chasing water I had never fished. And was it better? Sometimes the catch was good, but I was never there when it was good. I was already looking at the next bay, already thinking, perhaps over there, perhaps a little further." He set the shuttle down and looked at her. His eyes were the same color as the water, gray, with light moving through them. "I fished for 30 years before I understood something very simple. The fish are here. They have always been here. I was the one who kept leaving." She did not say anything. She looked out at the horizon, that clean, impossible line where the bronze water met the violet sky. And for the first time, she noticed something she had never noticed before. The horizon was not a place. It was not somewhere you could sail to. It was an illusion, a trick of distance and perspective. A line that moved backward at exactly the speed you moved toward it. You could chase it your entire life and never arrive, because there was nothing to arrive at. It was not a destination. It was the eye's way of drawing a border around the infinite. She sat with her father until the last light went out of the sky and the first stars appeared, small and cold and impossibly far away. The water turned from bronze to black. The dock creaked beneath them, and somewhere in that sitting, in that not going anywhere, in that letting the evening be exactly what it was without trying to make it into something else, she felt the pull in her chest loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. The way a fist loosens when you realize there is nothing in your hand worth holding onto. The Buddha had a word for what she had been carrying. He called it tanha, thirst, not the thirst for water or food or warmth, but the deeper thirst, the one that lives beneath all the others, the thirst for things to be different than they are, the thirst for somewhere else, something else, someone else, the quiet persistent belief that this moment, this one, right here, right now, is not the right one, that the right one is coming, is always coming, is always just out of reach. And the teaching he offered was not to kill the thirst. It was simply to see it, to notice it the way you notice a sound in the room, present, real but not the whole story, not the truth of things, just a habit of the heart that has been practiced for so long. It feels like nature. Tonight, if you are lying here with that same quiet pull, the feeling that you should be doing something, that you should be further along, that sleep should have come by now, that your mind should be quieter, that this moment should somehow be different than it is. You are not alone in that feeling. It is one of the oldest feelings in the world. And the fisherman's answer is available to you right now. In this breath, in this heartbeat. The fish are here. They have always been here. You are the one who keeps leaving. There was a man who learned this lesson in a way he never expected, not through wisdom or teaching or any kind of deliberate search, but through something breaking. He was a stonemason who had spent his whole life building walls, stone walls mostly. The kind that line the edges of fields and roads in the old countryside, walls that are not cemented but fitted, each stone chosen for its shape and weight, and placed against its neighbors, so precisely that they hold each other up without mortar, without glue, without anything but gravity and patience and the mason's eye for what fits where. His workshop was an open yard behind his house, surrounded by piles of stone in various sizes: granite, limestone, sandstone, slate, each pile sorted by color and density, and the particular way the stone broke when you struck it. The air in the yard smelled of dust and iron, and the faint, chalky sweetness of freshite limestone. His tools hung on a wooden rack against the back wall: chisels of different widths, hammers of different weights, a level, a plumb line, a set of measuring sticks worn smooth from years of handling. His hands were thick and scarred, the skin on his palms rough as the stone itself, and his forearms were heavy with the kind of muscle that comes not from exercise but from decades of lifting and placing and fitting. Lifting and placing and fitting. The same careful motion repeated 10,000 times. He was good at what he did. People came from distant towns to hire him. His walls were famous, not for their height or their grandeur, but for their rightness. They looked as if they had always been there, as if the stones had arranged themselves. He took pride in this. Perhaps too much pride, because when his hands began to shake, a tremor, faint at first, barely noticeable, a slight vibration in the fingertips when he held a chisel, he did not accept it. He fought it. He gripped harder. He worked longer hours. He told himself it was tiredness, cold weather, too much coffee. He told himself anything except the truth, which was that his body was changing, and the change was not something he could fix with willpower or technique or a tighter grip on the hammer. The tremor got worse. Over months, it moved from his fingertips into his hands, and from his hands into his wrists. The chisel slipped. The stones split where they should not have split. He ruined a piece of limestone that had taken him 2 days to shape, cracked it clean in half with a misplaced stroke, and he stood in the yard looking at the broken stone and felt something crack inside him too. Not dramatically, quietly, the way ice cracks on a pond when the spring sun touches it, a slow, spreading fracture that changes the surface of everything. He stopped working, not because he chose to, but because his hands would not let him continue. For the first few days, he told people the yard was closed for repairs. Then he stopped telling people anything. He sat in the yard among the piles of stone. Stone he had collected over decades. Stone he knew by touch, by weight, by the particular sound each one made when tapped with a knuckle. And the tools hung on the wall behind him, like a language he could no longer speak. And the air still smelled of dust and iron, and everything was exactly the same as it had always been, except that he could no longer do the thing that had made him who he was, the thing that had given his hands their purpose and his days their shape. An old friend came to visit, a woman who had known him since childhood, who had watched him build his first wall at 14 with stones he pulled from the river behind his parents' house. She found him sitting in the yard, hands in his lap, palms up, the tremor visible even from across the yard. "I am useless now," he said. She sat beside him on the low stone bench he had built years ago. Smooth granite, perfectly level, the kind of work that would last centuries. She did not say anything for a long time. She looked at the yard, at the piles of stone, at the tools on the wall. She looked at his hands. "You are sitting on the most beautiful bench I have ever seen." She said, "I cannot build another one." "No," she said, "but you can sit on this one, and you can feel the stone under you, the stone you shaped, the stone that holds you. And you can notice that it is a good day. The air is warm. The sky is clear. The yard smells the way it has always smelled. You are here. That is not useless. That is just different. He wanted to argue, but the warmth of the stone beneath him was real, and the sky above him was real, and his friend beside him was real, and the tremor in his hands was real too. And for the first time since the shaking began, he did not try to make any of it different. He just sat there, and the sitting, the being there without agenda, without the need to produce or prove or build, was not the life he had planned. But it was a life, and it was in that moment exactly enough. Zen Master Senkan, one of the earliest Zen patriarchs, wrote something that has survived across 15 centuries, because it is as true now as it was then. He wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart." What he meant in the language of a man sitting on a stone bench with shaking hands is this: the moment you stop insisting that this moment should be something other than what it is, the moment you stop dividing your experience into acceptable and unacceptable, into good enough and not good enough, into the life you wanted and the life you got, in that moment, something enormous opens up. Not happiness necessarily, not joy, just space, just room to breathe, just the quiet, enormous relief of not fighting anymore. There is a very old parable, so old that it exists in almost every tradition, in one form or another, about a man who fell into a river. The current was strong, and he fought it. He swam against it with all his strength, struggling toward the bank he had fallen from, reaching for the rocks and roots and anything solid he could grab. He exhausted himself. His arms burned. His lungs screamed. And the river, which did not care about his struggling, carried him steadily downstream. Finally, when he had no strength left, he stopped fighting. He turned onto his back and let the water hold him. And the river, the same river that had felt like an enemy when he was struggling against it, became something else entirely. It became a road. It carried him gently, easily past the rocks he had been trying to grab, past the bank he had been trying to reach, to a place downstream where the water was shallow and calm, and he could simply stand up and walk to shore. Pema Chödrön once said that we think the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem. But the truth is that things do not really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and fall apart again. The healing is in the letting go. The peace is in the not knowing. The rest, the real, deep bone-level rest, comes not when everything is fixed, but when you stop needing it to be. Perhaps you can feel this right now. The mattress beneath you is not asking you to do anything. The pillow is not waiting for you to solve a problem. The blanket is not keeping score. Everything that is holding you right now is holding you without conditions, without expectations, without needing you to be anything other than what you are in this exact moment, tired, perhaps worried, perhaps awake when you wish you were asleep. Perhaps all of that is allowed. All of that is accepted, not by you necessarily. You may still be fighting, still clenching, still reaching for the bank. But by the night itself, the night accepts everything. It always has. It is the most forgiving part of every day. And perhaps without deciding to, you have already begun to float. Perhaps the struggle has quieted, not ended, just quieted the way a river quiets when it reaches the wide, flat stretch before the sea. The hands may have opened. The breath may have deepened. The weight of the body may have settled one fraction further into the bed. You do not need to notice this. But if you do, let the noticing be gentle. Let it be the noticing of someone who has stopped swimming and is simply lying on their back, watching the sky move above them, letting the water carry them wherever it goes. Let us rest here for a moment. The night is deep now, and the stories have been long, and your body has earned this pause. Take a breath, let it out slowly. Feel how far you have come since we began. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a thread I have been saving for later in the night, one about the things that come and go, the things that do not last, and the strange comfort that lives inside that truth. It begins with a woman who kept a garden that bloomed for only 1 week every year. There was a woman who kept a garden that bloomed for only 1 week every year. It was not a large garden, just a narrow strip of earth along the south side of her cottage, bordered by a low stone wall that her grandfather had built before she was born. The wall was covered in moss now, soft and green and thick as velvet, and in winter it looked like a sleeping thing, something alive that had decided to lie down and wait. The cottage itself was old, whitewashed stone with a slate roof and small deep-set windows that let in the light in narrow golden columns on sunny mornings. The air around the cottage always smelled of something: wet earth after rain, cut grass in summer, wood smoke in autumn, and in the cold months that clean, sharp mineral scent that comes when frost settles on stone and stays. The garden was planted entirely with one kind of flower, a pale, almost translucent variety that her grandmother had grown before her, and her grandmother's mother before that. The bulbs had been passed down through 4 generations, carefully divided and replanted each autumn, wrapped in old newspaper and stored in wooden crates in the shed through the winter. No one in the family remembered the proper name of the flower anymore. They just called it the white one. It bloomed in early spring, usually the 2nd or 3rd week of April, depending on the weather, and it bloomed for exactly 7 days, sometimes 8, if the night stayed cool nevermore. The petals were thin and papery, and so pale they seemed to glow in the early morning light, and when the wind moved through them, they made a sound like whispering, like dozens of small voices, saying something just below the threshold of hearing. For 1 week, the garden was the most beautiful thing in the village. People walked past and slowed down. Children stopped on their way to school. The old man across the road, who had lived there for 60 years and seen thousands of mornings, still paused at his gate every April to look. And then, after 7 days, the petals fell. They did not wilt slowly or brown at the edges the way most flowers do. They simply let go all at once, in a single afternoon. Usually on a day when the wind was gentle and warm, the petals drifted down like snow and covered the ground in a thin white layer that the wind scattered by evening. And by the next morning, the garden was bare again, nothing but green stems and dark earth, as if the blooming had never happened at all. Her neighbor, a younger woman who had moved to the village a few years ago, and who grew roses that bloomed from June through September, asked her once why she did not plant something else. Something that lasted longer, something that gave more return for the work you spend the whole year preparing for 1 week. The neighbor said she was standing at the wall with her arms crossed, looking at the bare stems with the expression of someone who has just watched a magic trick and is trying to figure out where the rabbit went. It was late April. The petals had fallen the day before, and the ground beneath the wall was still faintly white, like the last traces of a late snow. You divide the bulbs in autumn. You amend the soil. You cover them against the frost in December, and you uncover them in March, and you watch them every day for a month. And then 7 days, and it is over. The roses on my fence bloom for 4 months. 4 months of color. It seems like so much work for so little reward. The woman was kneeling in the garden, clearing the fallen petals from between the stems with her bare hands. The petals were cool and damp against her fingers, already beginning to soften into the earth. She did not answer right away. She gathered a handful of petals and held them, weightless, fragile, already past. Have you ever noticed, she said, that the things that last forever are the things you stop seeing? Your roses bloom for 4 months. By August, you do not notice them anymore. They are just there, part of the background, like the wall or the fence. She let the petals fall from her hand. The wind took them. My flowers bloom for 1 week. And every single day of that week, I see them. I really see them. I notice the way the light comes through the petals in the morning. I notice when one opens and another closes. I notice the smell. It changes, from the first day to the last, sweeter at the end, as if the flower is giving everything it has before it goes. She brushed the earth from her knees and stood. It is not too little, she said quietly, looking at the bare stems, at the dark earth between them, at the last few petals caught in the moss on the wall. It is exactly enough. The shortness is what makes it beautiful. If it bloomed all summer, I would stop kneeling here. I would stop noticing the way the petals feel between my fingers, cool and thin, like tiny pieces of silk. I would stop watching for the first bud in March. I would stop holding my breath the morning they open. She paused. The shortness is not the price I pay for the beauty. The shortness is the beauty. The Buddha spoke of this with a directness that has survived 25 centuries, because it is impossible to misunderstand. All conditioned things are impermanent. He said all things that come together will come apart. This is not a warning. It is not a threat. It is simply the way things are, the way clouds form and dissolve, the way the tide comes in and goes out, the way a breath enters the body and leaves again, the way this night will pass into morning, whether you are awake to see it or not. And there are 2 ways to meet this truth. You can fight it, hold on tighter, grip harder, try to freeze the things you love in place, like insects in amber. Or you can do what the gardener did. You can stand in the middle of the blooming and see it, really see it, knowing that it will not last, knowing that the petals will fall, and letting that knowledge make the seeing sharper, clearer, more awake. Not sadder, more alive. Thich Nhat Hanh once held up a sheet of paper in front of an audience and asked them to look deeply into it. He said, if you look deeply enough, you can see the cloud that became the rain, that nourished the tree, that became the pulp that became this paper. The cloud is in the paper. The rain is in the paper. The tree is in the paper. Nothing is lost. It only changes form. The flower does not die. It becomes the soil. The soil becomes the bulb. The bulb becomes the flower again. There is no ending. There is only transformation. There is only the great, slow, patient turning of one thing into another. There was an old watchmaker who lived in a town where the river split into 2 channels around a narrow island, and the sound of the water was always present, a low divided murmur that was louder in spring when the snowmelt came down from the mountains, and quieter in late summer when the river ran low and slow, and you could see the smooth stones on the bottom, like a mosaic laid by some patient ancient hand. The watchmaker's shop was on the ground floor of a narrow building at the edge of the old bridge, and the vibration of the water beneath the bridge was so constant that it had become part of the mechanism of the place. The tools on his bench trembled faintly. The lamps swayed almost imperceptibly, and the watches themselves seemed to keep slightly better time, as if the river's rhythm corrected something that human hands had gotten almost but not quite right. He had been repairing watches for 50 years. His bench was covered in the small, precise instruments of his trade, tweezers finer than needles, screwdrivers the size of toothpicks, magnifying loops that he wore on a chain around his neck, and trays of tiny gears and springs and jewel bearings sorted by size into compartments no larger than a thumbnail. The light came from a single adjustable lamp that he positioned differently for every task, angled low for the smallest work, raised high when he needed to see the whole mechanism at once. His hands were thin and steady, the fingers long and slightly curved, and they moved among the tiny components with a delicacy that seemed impossible for hands that had also chopped wood and built shelves and held children. People brought him watches that had stopped, old watches, family watches, watches whose springs had broken, or whose gears had worn smooth over decades of faithful turning, and he would open them carefully, the way a doctor opens a patient, and he would look inside with his loupe pressed to his eye, and he would see the whole life of the watch laid out before him, the wear patterns that told him how it had been wound, the dust that told him where it had been kept, the scratches on the public case that told him how it had been carried and by whom. One afternoon, a young woman brought him her grandfather's pocket watch. It was old, very old, with a case of tarnished silver and a face that had yellowed to the color of old cream. The hands were stopped at 3:20. She set it on the counter gently, the way you set down something that belongs to someone you have lost. It was his, she said. He carried it every day for 40 years. In his vest pocket, on the left side, always the left side. He would take it out to check the time, even when there was a clock on the wall. It was not about the time. It was about the holding. She paused. It stopped the week he died. I do not know if it stopped before or after. I found it in his drawer, in a small leather case, and the hands were pointing at 3:20, and I have not wound it since, because I do not know if winding it would be the right thing to do. The watchmaker picked it up and held it to his ear. Nothing, just the silence of a thing that has been still for too long. He opened the back with a small tool and looked inside, adjusting the lamp so the light fell directly on the movement. The mainspring was intact, still coiled, still holding its tension, like a word caught in the throat. The gears were worn but serviceable, their teeth smoothed to a dull sheen by decades of faithful meshing. A tiny pivot had snapped, a piece of metal no larger than an eyelash, almost invisible to the naked eye. But without it, the whole mechanism was frozen. One small piece, and the entire thing stands still. That had always struck him, how little it takes to stop a thing that was designed to keep going. I can fix this, he said. Will it be the same? She asked. Her voice had the careful quality of someone who is afraid of the answer. Will it keep time the same way he kept time? He looked at her over the top of his loupe. It will keep time, he said, but not the same way. Nothing keeps time the same way twice. Every spring loses a fraction of its tension with each winding. Every gear wears 1/1000th of a millimeter with each rotation. The watch you give me tomorrow will be different from the watch you gave me today, even if the difference is too small to measure. He set the watch on a velvet cloth and positioned the lamp. That is not a flaw. That is what it means to be a thing that moves. Stillness is only for things that are finished. Your grandfather's watch is not finished. It still has time to keep. He repaired the pivot that afternoon, working under the lamp with his finest tools, his breath held, his fingers steady as prayer. When he wound the watch and held it to his ear, it ticked, a thin, bright, steady sound, like a small heart starting again after a long silence. He set the hands to the correct time and closed the case and held it for a moment in his palm, feeling the vibration of the movement against his skin, that tiny persistent pulse that meant something was alive in there. Something was moving. Something was counting the seconds one by one, the way a monk counts beads on a string. And he thought, as he often did at moments like these, about the strangeness of his profession, spending his life making things move that wanted to stop, keeping time flowing when time, left to itself, would simply stand still and gather dust. And the deeper truth beneath that, the one he never spoke aloud but felt in his hands every day, that nothing in the end stands still, not the watch, not the river beneath the bridge, not the hands that repair the spring, not the spring itself, not the grandfather who carried this watch for 40 years, not the granddaughter who brought it in with tears in her eyes. Everything moves. Everything changes. Everything passes through this world like light through glass. Briefly illuminated, briefly beautiful, briefly here. Dogen once wrote that time itself is being, and being is all time, which is a difficult thing to say and a simple thing to feel. Lying here in the dark, you can feel it. The hours are not standing in line, waiting for their turn. They are flowing. The way the river flows around the island, the way the blood flows through your body, the way your breath flows in and out without anyone telling it where to go or when to turn around. There is a very short story from the Zen tradition, almost more of a moment than a story, about a master who was dying. It was spring. The cherry trees outside the monastery window were in full bloom, their branches heavy with blossoms, so pink and so dense. They looked like clouds that had drifted down from the sky and gotten caught in the branches. The master's students gathered around his bed, weeping. Some had been with him for 30 years. Some were young and had barely begun. The room smelled of incense and the sweet, faintly bitter scent of the cherry blossoms coming through the open window on the warm air. The master looked at his students with great tenderness, the kind of tenderness that has no fear in it, only love, and he said, "Do not cry. Look at the cherry blossoms. They bloom and they fall, and no one weeps for them. They do not weep for themselves. They are beautiful precisely because they fall. Their beauty and their falling are not two different things. They are the same thing. That is, impermanence. Not a tragedy, a kind of grace. The grace of things that do not last and do not pretend to. The grace of a week of white flowers. The grace of a pocket watch that keeps time differently every day. The grace of this breath, this one, the one you are taking right now, which has never been taken before and will never be taken again. It is the only version of this breath that will ever exist. And that makes it, in its own quiet way, extraordinary. Perhaps you can feel the night moving through you right now, not as a thought, but as a sensation, the slow, barely perceptible shift of the hours, the way the darkness deepens almost without your noticing, the way the body grows heavier as the minutes pass. This is not something happening to you. It is something happening with you. You are part of the flow. You always were. The breath moves in, and the breath moves out, and the space between them is neither empty nor full. It is just space, just the place where one thing becomes another, the place where the petal lets go of the stem and begins its quiet fall toward the earth. Your eyelids may be heavier than they were a few minutes ago. The thoughts may have slowed, not stopped, just slowed like a river widening as it approaches the sea. The muscles in your back, in your legs, in the small spaces between your ribs may have released a tension you did not know you were carrying. All of this is impermanence working in your favor. The tightness that was there an hour ago has already changed. The worry that was sharp at the beginning of the night has already softened at the edges. Nothing stays the same, including the things that hurt. Let us rest here a moment longer. There is no rush. The night is patient, and so are the stories. Take a breath and let it carry you a little further into the dark. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more path I would like to walk with you before we begin our journey home. It is about the mind you already have, the ordinary, everyday mind that does not need to be special or enlightened or different in any way. It begins with a very simple question that a young monk once asked, and a very simple answer that changed everything. What is the way? A young monk once asked his teacher, and the teacher, who could have spoken about sutras and doctrines and centuries of commentary, said only this: ordinary mind is the way. The monk was confused. He had expected something harder, something more dramatic, something that required years of effort and discipline and special knowledge. He had expected a door that was locked and a key he would need to earn. Instead, the teacher pointed at the floor he was standing on and said, "You are already there. You have always been there." This is perhaps the most difficult teaching in all of Buddhism. Not because it is complicated, but because it is so simple that the mind refuses to believe it. We are trained from childhood to believe that the important things are hard, that peace must be earned, that wisdom must be pursued, that the quiet mind is something you achieve after decades of practice, like a black belt or a doctorate. And so, we keep searching, we keep climbing, we keep looking for the extraordinary experience that will finally make us feel the way we think we are supposed to feel. And all the while, the ordinary moment, this one, the one you are living right now, sits patiently at our feet, like a dog that has been waiting by the door all day, asking nothing, needing nothing, just happy to be near us. There is a story about a young woman who sold vegetables at a market, not a grand market in a city, but a small weekly gathering in a village square, where the same dozen vendors set up the same wooden tables every Saturday morning and sold the same potatoes and cabbages and bundles of herbs to the same neighbors who had been buying them for years. Her table was near the fountain, a stone basin carved from a single block of granite that had been there for so long that the edges had rounded and the surface had darkened to the color of charcoal. The water came down from a spring on the hill above the village through a narrow clay pipe that was as old as the fountain itself, and it fell with a steady, musical splash into the pool below, where it rippled outward in small concentric circles, before draining through a grate and running down the cobblestones in a thin, bright stream. Moss grew around the base of the fountain in a soft green ring, and in winter, when the temperature dropped, the spray from the falling water froze on the stone in thin, clear sheets that caught the morning sun like glass. The sound of the fountain was the sound of Saturday mornings, so constant, so woven into the fabric of market day, that it had become invisible background. White noise, the kind of sound you only notice when it stops. She was young, early 20s, and she was restless, in the way that young people in small places are restless. The way that makes the familiar feel like a cage even when the door is wide open, and the countryside beyond it stretches in every direction as far as the eye can see. She had read books about meditation and enlightenment. She had listened to talks online by teachers with gentle voices who spoke of presence and awareness and the luminous nature of consciousness. She understood the words. She could repeat them, but she could not feel them. The gap between the description of peace and the experience of peace seemed as wide as the sky, and she stood on one side of it every day, selling potatoes, wondering when the feeling would arrive. One Saturday, an old man she had never seen before came to her table. He was not from the village. His clothes were different, his accent unfamiliar, and he walked with the slow, deliberate care of someone who has been walking for a very long time. He bought a bag of potatoes and a bundle of mint, and as she counted his change, he looked at her and said something unexpected. "You have a good spot here. By the fountain, I suppose," she said. "I have been here every Saturday for 3 years. I do not really hear the fountain anymore." "That is a shame," he said. "It is a beautiful sound." She paused the coins in her hand, and she listened. For the first time in, she could not remember how long, she actually heard the fountain. The splash of the water into the basin, the way it echoed slightly off the stone wall behind her, the way the sound changed when the wind blew, and the stream of water shifted a fraction to the left or right. It was, she realized, beautiful. It had been beautiful the whole time. She had simply stopped listening. "How do you hear things like that?" she asked. "How do you notice what is right in front of you?" The old man smiled. His teeth were crooked, and his eyes were kind, and there were deep lines around them, the kind of lines that come from squinting into sunlight or from smiling. She could not tell which, and perhaps it was both. "I do not do anything special," he said. "I just forgot to stop paying attention." He picked up his bag of potatoes and his mint. Most people learn to ignore the world so they can think about the world. I never quite managed that. I kept getting distracted by the actual thing. He nodded toward the fountain. "You can hear it right now. You do not need to learn how. You just need to stop believing that something more important is supposed to be happening." He walked away into the market crowd, a thin figure with a bag of potatoes in one hand and a bundle of mint in the other, and she never saw him again. But she stood there holding the coins, listening to the fountain, and for a long moment the market fell away. The other vendors calling out prices, the customers arguing over the ripeness of tomatoes, the clatter of wooden crates being stacked, the laughter of children chasing each other between the tables. All of it receded, the way the background recedes when you look through a camera lens, and the foreground comes suddenly, sharply into focus, and there was only the sound of water falling into water, and the smell of mint from the bundle he had just bought, lingering in the air between them and the cool morning air on her face, where the spray from the fountain touched it, and the solid ancient cobblestones beneath her feet. Not enlightenment, not a mystical experience, not the luminous consciousness she had read about in books. Just this, just Saturday morning, just the fountain she had stopped hearing, and now, suddenly wonderfully, could not stop hearing. Zen Master Nansen, when he said that ordinary mind is the way, was pointing at exactly this. He was not telling the monk to become ordinary. He was telling him to notice that he already was ordinary, that the extraordinary thing he was searching for was not extraordinary at all. It was the sound of the fountain. It was the weight of potatoes in a cloth bag. It was the feeling of coins in the palm. It was the breath moving in and out of the body without anyone directing it. The sacred and the mundane are not two different things. They never were. They are the same thing seen with different eyes, or, more precisely, the same thing seen with eyes that have stopped looking for something else. Shunryu Suzuki put it another way. He said that enlightenment is not some special state of mind. It is the mind as it is. Not the mind improved, not the mind perfected, not the mind after 10,000 hours of meditation, just the mind as it is. Right now, with all its noise and mess and wandering, that mind, the one you are using to hear these words, is already the mind the teachers were pointing at. There is nothing to add to it. There is nothing to subtract from it. It is complete. It has always been complete. There was an older, retired living alone in a house at the edge of a town where the fields began and the streets ended, and the transition between the two was so gradual that you could not say exactly where the town stopped and the countryside started. His house was small and plain, brick walls, a flat roof, a front door that stuck in wet weather and had to be shouldered open with a particular twist that only he knew. The kitchen was the warmest room, and he spent most of his time there, sitting at a wooden table that was scarred with the marks of decades. Ring stains from coffee cups, scratches from keys and tools, a long shallow groove where his wife had rolled out pastry dough every Sunday morning for 30 years before she died. He had spent his working life as an engineer, a precise man, a man of measurements and tolerances and specifications, a man who believed that every problem had a solution and every solution could be calculated if you had enough data and enough patience. He had applied this same logic to his grief when his wife died. He read books about the stages of mourning. He made lists of things to do, sort her clothes, cancel her subscriptions, notify the bank, the insurance, the pension office. He worked through the list, methodically, checking each item off with the same careful attention he had once given to engineering drawings. He believed that if he completed the list, the grief would be completed too, that if he processed it efficiently, it would process out of him, the way a machine processes raw material into finished product. But grief is not a machine, and the list was never finished, because the things that hurt were not on the list. They were not the kind of things you could write down, or check off, or file in a drawer. The things that hurt were small and ambush-shaped. They hid in the corners of the day and leapt out without warning. The coffee cup she had used every morning, white, with a chip on the rim that she refused to throw away, because she said the chip was what made it hers. It sat in the cupboard among the other cups, identical, except for that small imperfection. And every morning when he opened the cupboard door, it was the first thing he saw. He could not bring himself to move it. He could not bring himself to use it. It just sat there, chipped and empty, and waiting for a hand that was never coming back. The indent on her side of the mattress, which held her shape for months after she was gone, as if the bed remembered what his mind could not accept. He slept on his side, had always slept on his side, and her side remained untouched. The pillow still slightly flattened where her head had rested, the blanket still pulled back the way she had left it on the last morning, and he could not smooth it out, because smoothing it out would mean acknowledging that no one was going to lie there again. The moments coming home to a dark kitchen, when he had spent 40 years coming home to a lit one, reaching for 2 plates instead of 1, and catching himself mid-reach with his hand already on the 2nd plate, hearing a song on the radio, an old song, the kind you do not think about until suddenly you do, that she would have hummed along to, slightly off-key the way she hummed everything, and the sudden terrible silence where her humming should have been. One evening he was sitting at the kitchen table, doing nothing, not reading, not planning, not working through his list. Just sitting. The light was fading. The window above the sink showed a sky that was the color of ash. Not beautiful, not dramatic, just gray. The way the sky is gray most days in most places. Unremarkably, unpoetically gray. He could hear the refrigerator humming. He could hear the clock on the wall. Her clock, a small round thing with a brass frame that she had bought at a flea market 30 years ago. And that had never kept perfect time, running 2 minutes slow every week, which she had found charming, and he had found quietly maddening. He listened to the clock, tick, 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 2 minutes slow. As always, 2 minutes behind the rest of the world, as always. 2 minutes that she had never corrected, because she said the clock was not wrong. It was simply living at its own pace. And who was she to tell a clock how fast to be? And something shifted in him. Not dramatically. Not like a revelation in a movie where the music swells and the light changes and the character's face transforms with sudden understanding. It was quieter than much quieter. It was like a cloud shifting, and suddenly the light in the room is different, and you cannot tell what changed. But you know something has. He realized that he was not waiting for anything. He was not trying to feel better. He was not trying to process or heal or move on or arrive at some stage of grief that the books told him he was supposed to reach by now. He was just sitting at a table, in a kitchen, in a house, at the edge of a town, listening to a clock that ran 2 minutes slow, and the evening was coming on, and the light was grey, and the refrigerator hummed its one low note, and none of this was special or meaningful or important in any way he could name. And yet, it was enough. It was, in that moment, everything. Not because something had been added, but because he had finally stopped waiting for something to be added. The Buddha once said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from," which is another way of saying that the seeker and the sought are the same thing. The peace you are trying to reach is the same awareness that is doing the reaching. You cannot find it because you are it. You have always been it. That is a strange thing to hear, perhaps, lying here in the dark, with a mind that may still be busy, with a body that may still be tense, with thoughts that may still be circling, to be told that this exactly, this, is the peace you were looking for. It does not feel peaceful. It feels ordinary. It feels like just another night, just another bed, just another set of thoughts doing their tired rounds. But that is exactly the point. The ordinary is not the obstacle to peace. The ordinary is the peace. The noise of the mind is not something that needs to be removed before the quiet can begin. The quiet is already here, underneath the noise, the way the sky is always there, behind the clouds, the way the bottom of the river is always still no matter how fast the surface is moving. Kobayashi Issa, the old Japanese poet who wrote about snails and sparrows and the dew on morning grass with the same reverence that other poets reserved for gods and mountains, knew this. He knew that the sacred does not live in temples or on mountaintops or in the hearts of saints. It lives in the sound of a clock that runs 2 minutes slow. It lives in the smell of coffee at 6 in the morning. It lives in the chip on a white cup that made it someone's favorite. It lives in the feeling of a pillow that has molded itself to the shape of your head over years of lying just like this, in just this position, in just this dark breathing, just this way. And perhaps that is what you can feel right now. Not something new. Not something that has been brought to you by these stories or earned by your attention, but something that was already here when you lay down tonight. Something that has been here all along. the weight of the blanket across your chest, the temperature of the air on your face, cool or warm, it does not matter which, only that you can feel it. The sound of your own breathing, in and out and in again, steady and faithful and utterly unremarkable, the most ordinary thing in the world. And also, if you listen closely enough, the most miraculous. Every breath is the body saying yes to this moment, yes to this night, yes to being here, alive in the dark, in the quiet, in the ordinary extraordinary middle of an ordinary extraordinary life. Let us rest here, in the ordinary. There is nowhere else we need to go. The stories are nearly finished, and the night is deep, and the only thing left to do is the simplest thing of all, to be here. Just here, just this. When you are ready, we will make our way gently toward the end of tonight's journey. There is one more story I would like to share with you. A longer one, a slower one, the kind that is meant to be the last thing you hear before the silence takes over, but there is no rush. The story will wait for you. It has been waiting a long time. We have come a long way together tonight. If you are still awake, and it is perfectly all right if you are, and perfectly all right if you are drifting, and perfectly all right if you have been somewhere in between for the last hour, then you have walked with me through a great deal of quiet country. We sat with a weaver who learned to open her hands. We stood in a greenhouse with a woman who loved orchids too much, and a neighbor who grew tomatoes and knew when to stop. We climbed a mountain with a boy who wanted the stars and found them only when he stopped running. We washed a bowl in a monastery where silence was the loudest thing in the room. We sat on a dock with a fisherman's daughter who discovered that the horizon is not a place you can reach, and on a stone bench with a man whose hands had stopped doing the thing they were made to do, and who found in that stopping a stillness he had never known when his hands were busy. We watched a garden bloom for 1 week and a watchmaker bring a grandfather's heartbeat back to life, and we listened to a fountain that had been beautiful the whole time, waiting only to be heard. These stories came from many places and many centuries, but they were all, in the end, about the same thing. They were about the mind that wants to be quiet, but does not know how. And the answer, the only answer, repeated in 100 different ways, by 100 different teachers, across 2,500 years of human searching, is that the quiet is already here. You do not need to build it. You do not need to earn it. You do not need to chase it up a mountain, or force it into a fist, or process it through a list. It is here the way the sky is here behind the clouds, the way the bottom of the river is still, no matter how fast the surface moves, the way the sound of the fountain fills the square, whether anyone is listening or not. Tonight we heard the Buddha say that the untrained mind thrashes like a fish on dry ground, not because it is broken, but because it is reaching for something to hold. And what we found, again and again, in story after story, is that the holding is the problem. The open hand is the answer, not the hand that grabs for peace, not the hand that squeezes water into a fist and wonders where it went. The hand that rests, palm up on the blanket, fingers loose, receiving whatever arrives, without clutching at it. You felt this tonight, perhaps without noticing. The weaver felt it on a misty mountain. The carpenter felt it on a warm rock by the sea. And now, lying here, you may feel it too, not as a thought, but as a sensation. The uncurling, the release, the moment the hand opens and discovers that what it was holding was never something it needed to keep. And we heard something else, something even simpler, if such a thing is possible. We heard Nansen say that the ordinary mind is the way, that the mind you have right now, the one that is tired, the one that may still be humming with fragments of the day, the one that wandered during these stories and came back and wandered again and came back again. That mind is not an obstacle to peace. It is the peace, not the improved version, not the mind after 10,000 hours of practice. Just this mind, the one hearing these words, the one that has been here all along, underneath the noise, underneath the planning, underneath the worry, the one that sits in a kitchen listening to a clock that runs 2 minutes slow and realizes, quietly without fanfare, that this moment, this plain, unremarkable, ordinary moment, is the only moment that has ever existed. And it is enough. It has always been enough. There is one more story I would like to tell you tonight. It is longer than the others and slower, and it is meant to be the last thing you hear before whatever comes next, whether that is sleep or silence or simply the sound of your own breathing in the dark. There was a woman who ran a laundry, not a large commercial operation, just a small service. She operated from the back of her house, washing and pressing clothes for the people in her neighborhood. The house was old, with thick walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter. And the back room, the laundry room, had a concrete floor and 2 large sinks and a clothesline that ran from one wall to the other. And on rainy days, the room was hung with shirts and sheets and tablecloths that dripped steadily onto the floor in a soft, irregular rhythm, like rain inside a building. She had been doing this work for most of her life. She had started helping her mother as a child, standing on a wooden stool to reach the washboard, her small hands moving the fabric back and forth across the ridges while her mother worked beside her, humming songs that had no words, just melodies that rose and fell like breathing. When her mother grew too old to work, she took over. When her mother died, she kept going. The laundry was not just a business, it was a conversation that had never ended. Her hands doing what her mother's hands had done, in the same room, at the same sinks, with the same smells of soap and starch and warm cotton. She was not a Buddhist. She had never read a sutra or sat on a cushion or spoken to a monk. She did not meditate. She did not practice mindfulness. She did not know the word impermanence, or the word equanimity, or the word satori. She knew the word clean. She knew the word wrinkled. She knew the word ready. These were her sutras, and they were enough. Every morning she sorted the laundry, whites here, colors there, delicates on the side. She checked every pocket. People left things in their pockets, coins and receipts and tissues, and once a small folded photograph of a woman standing in a garden, which she placed carefully on the shelf above the sink, and which no one ever came back for. She treated stains with a paste she made from ingredients her mother had taught her: baking soda, white vinegar, a little lemon juice, mixed in a chipped ceramic bowl that had been her grandmother's. She knew stains the way a doctor knows symptoms. This one is grease. This one is wine. This one is grass. This one is blood. Each one required a different approach, a different patience, a different kind of attention. She washed by machine now. Her mother had washed by hand, but the machine was a concession to age and volume that she had made reluctantly, as if by accepting the machine she were admitting that her hands alone were no longer enough. But she still did some things by hand. The delicates, the old lace tablecloths that belonged to a woman down the street who brought them in twice a year, before Easter and before Christmas, wrapped in tissue paper and carried as carefully as if they were made of cloud. She washed these in the sink, in lukewarm water, with a soap so gentle it barely made suds, and she laid them flat on a clean towel to dry, smoothing out the lace with her fingertips, the way you smooth a child's hair. The ironing was her favorite part. She ironed in the afternoons, when the light came through the window at a low angle and made the steam from the iron glow like smoke in a cathedral. The iron was heavy, a professional model, solid and hot, the kind that makes a deep, satisfying hiss when it meets damp fabric. She ironed slowly, pressing each section flat, moving the garment a quarter turn, pressing again. The wrinkles disappeared under the weight of the iron, the way clouds disappear when the wind moves through them, not all at once, but steadily, inevitably, until the fabric lay smooth and warm and still. She could feel the heat radiating through the cotton against her wrist. She could feel the moisture leaving the cloth, rising as steam into the golden afternoon light, catching the sun for a moment before dissolving. And the rhythm of her pressing, back and forth, was a rhythm so steady and so old that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than habit, from somewhere below thought, from the place the body goes when the mind stops giving it instructions and simply lets it do what it has always known how to do. She did not worry about the electric bill while she ironed, or the ache in her left knee, or the sound the car had made that morning. Those thoughts existed somewhere, but they stayed at the edges, the way the noise of the street stayed at the edges of the laundry room, present but distant, unable to reach the center where she stood with the iron in her hand and the steam in the air and the slow golden light on the wall. She did not think about what she was doing, not in the way you think about a problem or a plan. She thought about it the way you think about breathing, which is to say, she did not think about it at all. Her hands knew, the iron knew, the shirt beneath the iron knew, and in that knowing, in that careful, wordless, attentive doing, something happened that she had no name for and no need to name. The mind grew quiet, not empty, not blank, just quiet, the way a room grows. Quiet when the last person stops talking and everyone is simply sitting together in the warmth. People sometimes asked her how she could stand the monotony of it. The same work every day for decades, the same sinks, the same iron, the same stains, the same shirts. Didn't she want something more, something different, something bigger? She would look at them with an expression that was not puzzled, exactly, but curious, as if they had asked her whether she found breathing monotonous. It is not the same, she would say. Every shirt is different. Every stain is different. The water is different every day, harder in winter, softer in spring. The light is different every afternoon. I am different every morning. She would go back to her ironing. You only think it is the same because you are not paying attention. She ironed until the light went out of the window, and then she folded the finished clothes and stacked them in neat piles, each one labeled with the owner's name, written in pencil on a small card, and she placed them on the shelf where they waited, clean pressed, folded ready, until their owners came to collect them. And at the end of every day, she wiped down the sinks and swept the floor and hung the iron on its hook and stood for a moment in the empty room with the smell of clean cotton in the air and the last of the daylight fading through the window. And she felt something she never tried to name, a completeness, a wholeness, the feeling of a day that had been fully lived. Not perfectly, not grandly, not in a way that anyone would write about or remember, but fully. Every shirt attended to, every stain addressed, every wrinkle pressed smooth. And tomorrow there would be more shirts, and more stains, and more wrinkles, and she would attend to those too. And the day after that, and the day after that, and each day would be both exactly the same and entirely different. The way each breath is exactly the same and entirely different. The way each night is exactly the same and entirely different. The way this night, your night, the one you are living right now, is both one of 10,000 nights and the only night exactly like this one that will ever exist. She did not know that she was practicing what the monks practiced. She did not know that the iron in her hand was a meditation bell, and the steam was incense, and the rhythm of her pressing was a kind of chanting, and the quiet that gathered around her every afternoon was the same quiet that gathers in the oldest monasteries in the world, where monks have been sitting in silence for 1,000 years. She did not need to know. The knowing would not have added anything. The quiet was already complete. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, as the stories come to their close, let us turn our attention gently, very gently, to the body that has been carrying you through this night. You have been lying here for a long time now, and the body has been listening to these stories in its own way, doing its own quiet work beneath the surface of your attention. Perhaps you notice that the shoulders have dropped, not because you told them to, but because they have been slowly releasing their grip on the day. For the last 2 hours, they are lower now than they were when you first lay down. Heavier, more settled. The muscles at the base of the neck, the ones that tighten when you sit too long, or worry too much, or hold the phone between your ear and your shoulder, those muscles have softened. You do not need to soften them further. They are already doing it on their own. The jaw too. The jaw holds more tension than almost any other part of the body. The tension of words unsaid, of teeth clenched against frustration, of smiles held longer than they were felt. Right now the jaw may have loosened just enough that the lips are barely parted, that the tongue rests easy against the roof of the mouth, that the whole lower half of the face feels slack and warm and heavy. This is not something you are doing. This is something your body remembers how to do when the mind stops telling it to stay alert. The hands, wherever they are resting, on the blanket, on the pillow against your side, they may feel heavier than they did at the beginning. The fingers may have uncurled. The palms may have opened, just slightly, just enough, like the weaver's hands on the blanket, like the carpenter's hands at his sides. Open, receiving, not reaching for anything, not holding on to anything, just resting in the quiet, palms up way that hands rest when they have finally been given permission to stop. The breath has found its own rhythm now. You may notice it, or you may not. It is slower than it was, deeper. It moves through the body like a tide, rising into the chest, filling the ribs, then falling back, emptying, making space. And in that space, in the pause between the inhale and the exhale, in that small still moment where the breath turns, there is a quiet that is older than any story, deeper than any teaching, more restful than any sleep. It is the quiet that has been underneath everything tonight, underneath the words, underneath the stories, underneath the thoughts that came and went and came again. It was always there. You are simply close enough now to feel it. The whole body is heavier now. You can feel the weight of it, the weight of the legs, long and still and warm beneath the blanket, the weight of the arms, wherever they have come to rest, the weight of the head on the pillow, sinking a little deeper with each exhale, and the eyes that have worked so hard today, scanning and reading and watching and searching, even behind closed lids. You may feel them softening, the small muscles around the eyes, the ones that tighten when you concentrate or squint or hold back tears, are releasing now, letting go of their vigil, allowing the darkness behind the eyelids to become not just an absence of light, but a presence of rest, warm, velvety, complete. This heaviness is not tiredness. It is gravity. It is the earth gently pulling you toward itself, the way it has been pulling you since the moment you were born. And tonight, you can let it. You can let the weight be weight. You can let the heaviness be heaviness. You can let the body sink one more fraction into the bed, one more fraction into the dark, one more fraction into whatever is waiting beneath the last thin layer of wakefulness. And so the night continues. The stories have been told, and they have done their work. And now they are drifting away from you, like boats on a calm sea, growing smaller, growing quieter, their shapes dissolving into the dark, the way shapes dissolve when you close your eyes and let the world go soft. The weaver is asleep now, in her house, at the foot of the mountain, with the mist moving through the valley outside her window. The carpenter is asleep, with the sound of the sea coming through his open window. The boy on the mountain is sleeping under the stars. The woman who grew orchids has set down her watering can and closed the greenhouse door and gone to bed. The fisherman's daughter is lying in her room, with the sound of the water against the dock. And the stonemason is resting on his bench with the sky above him. And the watchmaker has wound the last watch and closed his shop and gone upstairs to his small room above the bridge, where the river murmurs beneath him all. Night long they are all sleeping now. And you are here, in your own room, in your own bed, in your own night. And the quiet that held them is the same quiet that holds you. It is the same quiet that has held every person who has ever lain down at the end of a long day and listened to the dark and waited for sleep to come. It is the oldest quiet in the world. And it is here. It is right here. The night outside is doing what the night has always done, moving slowly, patiently, without hurry, carrying the world from one day to the next. The moon is somewhere above you, doing its ancient work, and the earth is turning beneath you, so slowly you cannot feel it. And you are here, on the surface of this turning world, held by gravity and darkness and the soft weight of everything that has been said tonight. You do not need to be awake for the morning. The morning will come on its own, the way it has always come, quietly, gradually, the darkness thinning into grey, and the grey warming into gold, and the birds beginning one by one until the silence is full of small brave voices. But that is hours away, hours and hours, and between now and then there is only this, the breath, the blanket, the dark, the quiet. And so the voice grows softer now, not because there is nothing left to say, but because the silence is ready. It has been waiting patiently, behind every story, beneath every word, in the pause between every breath. And it is a good silence, a kind silence, the silence of a room where all the work is done, and the iron is hung on its hook, and the clothes are folded, and the light has faded, and there is nothing left but the clean smell of cotton and the warmth of a day that has been fully, carefully, gently lived. Rest now. The stories will be here tomorrow night, and the night after that. But tonight, there is nothing left to carry, nothing left to hold, nothing left to do but close your eyes and feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, and the warmth of the dark around you, and the slow, steady, ancient rhythm of your own breathing, in and out, and in and out, like the sea against a quiet shore, like the wind through a valley, where everyone is sleeping, like the heartbeat of someone who is loved and who is safe. and who is finally, gently, beautifully home.